The bank's foreclosure notice trembled in Olivia Gardner's weathered hands as she stood on the porch of the ranch house. Her late husband had built with his own two hands, and she knew that by sunset tomorrow, everything she had left of him would belong to strangers. The New Mexico sun beat down mercilessly on Pinos Altos that September morning in 1878, turning the dusty Main Street into a shimmering ribbon of heat. Olivia had walked into town before dawn, her best dress already clinging to her back with perspiration, her dark blonde hair pinned up under a simple bonnet. At 32 years old, she had been a widow for 8 months, and in that time, she had learned more about heartbreak and hardship than in all her previous years combined. Thomas Gardner had been thrown from a spooked horse during a lightning storm last January. He had died 3 days later, never regaining consciousness, leaving Olivia alone with their modest cattle ranch 5 miles outside of town. She had tried everything to keep the place running. She had worked from before sunrise until after dark, mending fences, tending the cattle, fixing what broke, and ignoring the blisters on her palms and the exhaustion that made her bones ache. But cattle prices had dropped, a summer drought had withered the grazing land, and the banknote Thomas had taken out to expand the herd 2 years ago had come due. The banker, a thin man named Harold Pritchard with spectacles that magnified his cold eyes, had been unmoved by her tears and her pleading. He had given her 30 days to come up with the money or face foreclosure. That had been 29 days ago. Olivia had sold everything she could spare. Her mother's jewelry, Thomas's good saddle, the silver candlesticks that had been a wedding gift. She had even sold her piano, the one luxury she had brought from St. Louis when she married Thomas and followed him west. But it was not enough. The bank wanted $800, and she had managed to scrape together only $473. Now she walked past the general store, the saloon, and the blacksmith shop, her head held high despite the pitying looks from the townspeople who knew her situation. The auction was set for 3 o'clock that afternoon in front of the courthouse. Her land, her cattle, her home, everything would go to the highest bidder. The courthouse square was already filling with people when she arrived. Some were there out of genuine interest in buying property, but most had come for the spectacle, the entertainment of watching a neighbor's misfortune unfold. Olivia found a spot in the shade of a cottonwood tree and tried to make herself invisible. She watched as men examined the posted notice describing her property. 200 acres of good ranch land, a sturdy house, a barn, a well that never ran dry, and 40 head of cattle. It was worth far more than $800, but the bank would sell it for whatever they could get to cover the debt, and the rest would be lost to her. At 2:45, a rider came into town from the east, and something about him made people turn to look. He sat tall in the saddle, a man in his mid-30s with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled at his collar beneath his wide-brimmed hat. He wore the dusty clothes of a working cowboy, but there was something in the way he carried himself that suggested he was more than just a drifter. His horse was a fine roan gelding, well cared for and strong. The man dismounted in front of the saloon, tied his horse to the rail, and walked with an easy, confident stride toward the courthouse. His eyes, Olivia noticed, were a striking pale blue, almost gray, and they seemed to take in everything around him with a quiet intelligence. He stopped to read the auction notice, his expression unreadable. "That is Frank Sullivan," whispered Martha Henderson, the doctor's wife, who had come to stand beside Olivia. "He used to work for the cattle outfit up near Santa Fe. Word is he made a small fortune driving herds to Kansas and investing in mining claims. Nobody knows why he is back in these parts." Olivia barely heard her. She was watching the county clerk climb the courthouse steps to begin the auction. Her throat felt tight and her eyes burned, but she refused to cry in front of all these people. She had shed enough tears in private. "Ladies and gentlemen," the clerk called out in a nasal voice, "we are here to auction the property known as the Gardner Ranch to satisfy a debt owed to the Pinos Altos Savings and Trust. The property consists of 200 acres, improvements including a house and barn, water rights, and 40 head of cattle. We will start the bidding at $500. Olivia's fingernails dug into her palms. $500, less than the property was worth for the land alone. "500, called out a voice. It belonged to Ernest Whitmore, a neighboring rancher who had been trying to buy her land even before Thomas died. He was a thick-set man with a red face and small, greedy eyes. "600, said another man, someone Olivia did not recognize. "700, Whitmore countered immediately. The bidding went back and forth, climbing slowly. Olivia felt sick. Each number was another nail in the coffin of her dreams, another step away from the life she had built with Thomas. $1,000, said a new voice, quiet but carrying clearly across the square. Everyone turned. It was Frank Sullivan, the cowboy who had just ridden into town. He stood with his thumbs hooked in his belt, his expression calm. Ernest Whitmore's face darkened. 1,100, he snapped. 1,500, Frank said without hesitation. A murmur ran through the crowd. That was well above what anyone had expected the bidding to reach. Whitmore glared at Frank, his jaw working. 1,600, he said finally. 2,000, Frank replied, his tone as even as if he were discussing the weather. The square fell silent. $2,000 was a fortune, far more than the debt Olivia owed. Whitmore looked like he wanted to bid again, but his wife, a sharp-featured woman in a prim bonnet, put a hand on his arm and shook her head firmly. $2,000, the clerk repeated, his voice rising with excitement. Going once, going twice, sold to the gentleman in the gray hat for $2,000. It was done. Olivia felt the world tilt beneath her feet. A stranger now owned everything she had. She would have to pack her belongings, leave the house where she had been happy, where she had loved and been loved. She would have to start over with nothing. She turned away before anyone could see the tears that finally spilled down her cheeks and began walking quickly out of the square, away from the crowd, away from the pitying stares and the whispered conversations. "Mrs. Gardner," a voice called behind her. "Madam, please wait." She kept walking, but the voice persisted, and she heard boot heels on the packed dirt behind her. A hand touched her elbow gently, and she stopped, turning to find herself face to face with Frank Sullivan. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun, the small scar on his jaw, the dust on his clothes. But what struck her most were his eyes, so pale and clear, looking at her with an expression she could not quite read. "Mrs. Gardner," he said again, removing his hat respectfully. "My name is Frank Sullivan. I wonder if I might have a word with you." "You have bought my home, Mr. Sullivan," Olivia said, and she hated how her voice shook. "What more is there to say?" "Quite a bit, actually," he said quietly. "Is there somewhere we could talk privately?" Olivia wanted to refuse, to walk away and preserve what little dignity she had left, but something in his manner made her pause. He was not looking at her with triumph or pity, but with a kind of gentle respect that caught her off guard. "There is a bench behind the church," she said finally. "We can talk there." He nodded and walked beside her, leading his horse by the reins. They did not speak as they made their way through the side streets to the small white church at the edge of town. Behind it, in the shade of an ancient oak tree, sat a weathered wooden bench where parishioners sometimes rested after services. Olivia sat down, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Frank tied his horse to a nearby post and then sat down on the other end of the bench, his hat resting on his knee. "I expect you are wondering why I bought your property," he said. "I imagine you got a good deal," Olivia replied, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "Everyone knows I was desperate." "That is not why I bought it," Frank said. He turned to look at her directly. "Mrs. Gardner, I knew your husband." Olivia's head snapped up. "You knew Thomas?" "I did. It was about 10 years ago, before you came west. I was working a cattle drive from Texas up through New Mexico, and we stopped near Fort Union to rest the herd. There was a dispute with some local ranchers who claimed we were on their land. Things got heated, and it looked like it was going to turn into a shooting match." Frank paused, his eyes distant with memory. "Your husband stepped in. He was working as a deputy marshal at the time. He could have just arrested everyone and let the courts sort it out, but instead he talked to both sides, found a compromise, and prevented bloodshed. One of the ranchers in our outfit was my older brother James. If shooting had started, James would have been in the thick of it. Thomas Gardner probably saved his life that day." Olivia felt her throat tighten. She had known Thomas had worked in law enforcement before they married, but he had rarely spoken of those days. He had always said he preferred the quiet life of ranching to the violence he had seen. "I did not know," she whispered. "James died 3 years ago. Pneumonia," Frank continued. "But I never forgot what your husband did. When I heard about Thomas passing, I wanted to come pay my respects, but I was up in Colorado at the time, working a claim. By the time I got back to New Mexico, months had passed." He looked down at his hat, turning it slowly in his hands. "Then I heard you were in trouble with the bank. I rode here as fast as I could." "Why?" Olivia asked. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" "Because I owed Thomas Gardner a debt I can never repay," Frank said simply. "And because no woman should lose her home because she could not pay a debt that never should have been her burden in the first place." Olivia stared at him, not understanding. "I do not follow." Frank reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a folded document. He handed it to her. "This is the deed to your property. I bought it from the bank, and now I am giving it back to you. The land is yours, Mrs. Gardner, free and clear." Olivia looked at the paper in her hands, then back at Frank, certain she had misheard. "I do not understand. You are giving me my land." "Yes, madam, but you paid $2,000 for it. That is a fortune." "I can afford it," Frank said quietly. "And your husband's kindness was worth far more than that to my family." Olivia felt tears streaming down her face again, but this time they were not tears of despair. "Mr. Sullivan, I cannot accept this. It is too much. I cannot repay you." "I am not asking you to," Frank said. He stood up, preparing to leave. "The land is yours. That is all there is to it." "Wait," Olivia said, rising quickly. "Please, you cannot just do this and walk away. At least let me offer you supper or a place to stay for the night. The land may be mine, but I still have a debt of gratitude to pay." Frank looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something flicker in those pale eyes. Hesitation, perhaps, or loneliness. Finally, he nodded. "I would appreciate a meal, Mrs. Gardner. It has been a long ride." They rode out to the ranch together. Olivia on the old mare she had ridden into town, and Frank on his roan gelding. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange. The land looked beautiful in this light, Olivia thought. The rolling hills, the scattered junipers and pinyons, the distant peaks still holding patches of snow even in September. This was her home, and thanks to a stranger's extraordinary kindness, it would remain her home. The ranch house came into view, a simple but sturdy structure of adobe and timber with a wide porch that Thomas had built to catch the evening breeze. The barn stood nearby, and Olivia could see her cattle grazing in the pasture beyond. Everything looked the same as it had that morning, but everything had changed. Inside, the house was neat but sparse. Olivia had sold most of the nice furnishings to try to raise money for the bank. What remained were the essentials: a table and chairs, a cookstove, a bed in the back room, and a few personal items she could not bear to part with. "Please sit down," Olivia said, gesturing to the table. "I will prepare something to eat." "Let me help," Frank offered. "I am a fair hand in the kitchen." They worked together in a surprisingly comfortable silence. Olivia put coffee on to boil and began preparing a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and salt pork, while Frank brought in firewood and stoked the stove. It felt strange to have a man in her kitchen again, to hear the sound of boot heels on the wooden floor and smell tobacco and leather and horse. But it was not an unpleasant strangeness. As they ate, they talked. Frank told her about his life, how he had come west from Ohio as a young man seeking adventure and fortune, how he had worked as a cowboy, a scout, and a prospector. He spoke of the cattle drives he had been on, the mountains he had crossed, the hardships and the joys of life on the frontier. "But it gets lonely," he admitted, looking down at his coffee cup. "I have spent so many years drifting from place to place, never putting down roots. I have money now from my mining investments, but sometimes I wonder what it is all for if there is no one to share it with." Olivia felt a pang of sympathy. "I understand loneliness," she said softly. "Since Thomas died, I have felt like half of myself is missing. We were married for 8 years, and every day he made me feel like the most important person in the world. I do not know how to be alone." "You loved him very much," Frank said. "It was not a question." "I did," Olivia confirmed. "I still do, I always will." They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the crackling of the fire in the stove. "Thomas was a good man," Frank said finally. "I could see that from just one meeting. He had honor. That is a rare thing." "He did," Olivia agreed. "He was the best man I ever knew." She paused, then added, "Until today, perhaps." Frank looked up at her, surprise in his eyes. "I have not done anything special, Mrs. Gardner. I just paid a debt." "You gave me back my life," Olivia said, her voice fierce. "You gave me hope when I had none. That is more than special, Mr. Sullivan. That is extraordinary." Pink colored Frank's cheeks, and he looked away. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Olivia said firmly. "They would not have. Ernest Whitmore would have bought this place and turned me out without a second thought. You are a rare man, Frank Sullivan." The use of his first name had slipped out without her intending it, and Olivia felt heat rise to her own cheeks. But Frank did not seem to mind. If anything, he looked pleased. "If we are being informal, I would be honored if you called me Frank," he said. "And may I call you Olivia?" "Yes," she said. "I would like that." The sun had fully set by the time they finished eating, and the night air was cooling rapidly, as it did in the high desert. Frank stood to leave, reaching for his hat. "I have taken enough of your time," he said. "I should head back to town and find a room at the boarding house." "Nonsense," Olivia said. "It is a long ride in the dark, and you have done me such a service. The least I can do is offer you a place to sleep. The barn has a comfortable hayloft, and I will bring you blankets." Frank hesitated, then nodded. "If you are sure it is not an imposition." "I am sure," Olivia said. She found her best quilts and carried them out to the barn, where Frank was already settling his horse for the night. The barn smelled of hay and leather and animals, familiar and comforting smells. She climbed the ladder to the loft and spread the blankets over the clean hay. "This should keep you warm," she said. "If you need anything, the house is just across the yard." "Thank you, Olivia," Frank said, and the way he said her name, soft and respectful, made something flutter in her chest. She climbed back down the ladder and returned to the house, but sleep did not come easily that night. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the extraordinary events of the day. She had gone into town expecting to lose everything, and instead, she had met a man who had restored everything to her, asking nothing in return. It seemed like something from a fairy tale, not real life. And yet it was real. Frank Sullivan was real, sleeping in her barn right now. A stranger who was not really a stranger at all, connected to her through her late husband's kindness. Over the following days, Frank did not leave. He said he wanted to make sure Olivia was truly settled, that there were no problems with the bank or the deed. But Olivia suspected there was more to it than that. She saw the way he looked at the ranch, with a kind of longing, as if he were imagining what it would be like to have a place like this to call home. He made himself useful, fixing the fence posts that had been leaning since spring, repairing the barn door that had never quite closed right, and helping her move the cattle to fresh grazing. He worked with the easy competence of a man who had spent his life doing such tasks, and Olivia found herself grateful for his presence in ways that went beyond the practical help he provided. She enjoyed his company. Frank was quiet but not silent, thoughtful but not brooding. He had a dry sense of humor that caught her by surprise and made her laugh when she had not thought she would ever laugh again. He was respectful of her grief, never pushing or prying, but also treating her like a capable woman rather than a fragile widow. On the fourth day after the auction, they were mending fence together in the north pasture when Frank suddenly spoke. "Olivia, I have been thinking about something," he said, hammering a nail into a replacement post. "What is that?" she asked, holding the wire taut for him. "I have been drifting for a long time, never staying anywhere for more than a few months. I have money saved up, and I have been thinking it is time to put down roots somewhere." He paused, not looking at her. "This is beautiful country. A man could build a good life here." Olivia's heart began to beat faster. "Are you thinking of staying in Pinos Altos?" "I am thinking about it," Frank said carefully. "But I would not want to make you uncomfortable. If my being here is too much, too soon after your loss, I will move on. I want you to know that." Olivia set down the wire and looked at him directly. "Frank, you have been a godsend. If you want to stay in the area, I would be glad of it. You have become a friend, and I have needed a friend more than you know." Something eased in Frank's expression. "I am glad to hear that. Because the truth is, I have not felt this settled in years. Maybe ever." They worked in companionable silence for a while longer, but Olivia's mind was racing. What was happening between them? Was it just friendship born of gratitude and circumstance, or was it something more? And if it was something more, was she ready for that? Thomas had only been gone 8 months. Was it wrong to feel drawn to another man so soon? That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky, Frank told her more about his life. "I never knew my father," he said. "He died before I was born. My mother raised me and James on her own, working as a seamstress in Cleveland. It was hard, always scrambling to make ends meet. When James turned 18, he headed west, and 2 years later I followed. We worked together for a while, cowboying and trying our hand at different ventures. Then James decided to start his own small ranch, and I kept drifting, always thinking the next town or the next opportunity would be the one that satisfied me." "And did it?" Olivia asked. "Did you find what you were looking for?" Frank shook his head slowly. "I found some success, yes, made some money, saw some incredible country, but satisfaction? No, I think I was looking for the wrong thing. I was looking for adventure and fortune when what I really needed was a place to belong. A home. And now," Olivia prompted gently. Frank turned to look at her, and in the dim light from the window his eyes seemed to glow. Now I think I might have found it." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Olivia knew he was not just talking about the land or the town. He was talking about her, about them, about this fragile connection that was forming despite all the reasons it should not. "Frank," she said carefully, "I need you to understand something. I loved my husband with all my heart. I still do. That will never change." "I would never ask it to," Frank said quietly. "A love like that is something to be honored, not forgotten." "But," Olivia continued, her voice shaking slightly, "I also know that Thomas would not want me to spend the rest of my life alone, mourning him. He always said life was for living, that every day was a gift." She took a breath. "I am not ready to think about the future yet, about what might be possible, but I am not asking you to leave either. Does that make sense?" Frank nodded slowly. "It makes perfect sense." "I am not going anywhere, Olivia. Whenever you are ready, if you are ever ready, I will be here. And if you are never ready, I will still be here as your friend." The sincerity in his voice brought tears to Olivia's eyes. "How can you be so patient, so understanding?" "Because you are worth waiting for," Frank said simply. As September turned to October, Frank rented a room at the boarding house in town but spent his days at the ranch, helping Olivia with the work that needed doing before winter set in. They cut and stacked hay, repaired the roof, and brought the cattle down from the high pastures. The work was hard, but it was also satisfying, especially with Frank's help. The townspeople noticed, of course. Pino's Altos was small and gossip traveled fast. Olivia heard the whispers when she went to church on Sundays, saw the speculative looks when she and Frank walked into the general store together. Some people were scandalized that a widow would be seen so often with a man so soon after her husband's death. Others were more sympathetic, saying she deserved happiness, and that Frank seemed like a decent man. Martha Henderson, the doctor's wife, was firmly in the sympathetic camp. "Do not pay attention to the busybodies," she told Olivia one Sunday after services. "You have every right to rebuild your life. Frank Sullivan is a good man, and if he makes you happy, that is all that matters." "It is not like that," Olivia protested, though she could feel her cheeks burning. "We are just friends." Martha gave her a knowing look. "If you say so, dear. But I have seen the way he looks at you, and the way you look at him. That is not just friendship." Olivia could not deny that her feelings for Frank were growing deeper with each passing day. She found herself looking forward to his arrival each morning, missing him when he rode back to town each evening. She noticed things about him that made her heart flutter. The way he smiled when he was pleased, the gentleness with which he handled the animals, the strength in his hands and the kindness in his eyes. But guilt plagued her. Was she betraying Thomas's memory by caring for another man? Was she moving on too quickly? She spent long hours at night wrestling with these questions, sometimes crying into her pillow, sometimes talking to Thomas as if he could hear her. "I do not know what to do," she whispered one night, looking at the photograph of Thomas that sat on her bedside table. "I loved you so much, I still do. But I am so lonely and Frank is so good to me. Would you understand? Would you forgive me?" Of course, Thomas did not answer, but in the silence, Olivia felt a kind of peace settle over her. She remembered something Thomas had said to her once, after they had attended the funeral of a young woman in town. "If anything ever happens to me," he had said, holding her close, "I want you to promise me you will not shut yourself off from life. You have too much love to give, Olivia. Do not waste it on grief." She had laughed at the time, pushing the morbid thought away. But now those words came back to her with a clarity that felt like a message from beyond the grave. Thomas had loved her enough to want her to be happy, even if that happiness came with someone else. The first frost came in late October, coating the ranch in a glittering layer of white that melted away by mid-morning. Olivia was in the barn, milking the cow, when she heard Frank ride in. He came into the barn carrying a bundle wrapped in brown paper. "Good morning," he said, his breath visible in the cold air. "I brought you something from town." Olivia straightened up, brushing stray hair from her face. "You did not have to do that." "I wanted to," Frank said. He handed her the bundle. "Open it." Inside the paper was a thick wool shawl in a beautiful deep blue, soft and warm. Olivia ran her fingers over it, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "Frank, this is lovely, but I cannot accept this. It is too much." "It is a shawl," Frank said with a slight smile, "and winter is coming. I do not want you to be cold." "But Olivia," Frank interrupted gently, "please let me do this. Let me take care of you even in small ways. It makes me happy." Olivia looked up at him, and something in his expression made her heart ache. He was not asking for her love or her commitment. He was simply asking to be allowed to care for her. How could she refuse that? "Thank you," she said softly. "It is beautiful." Frank helped her drape the shawl around her shoulders. His hands lingered for just a moment on her arms, and Olivia felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the wool spread through her body. She looked up at him, and their eyes met and held. "Olivia," Frank said, his voice rough, "I know I said I would wait, and I will. But I need you to know how I feel. I am falling in love with you. I think I have been since the first moment I saw you standing in the courthouse square, trying so hard to be brave. You do not have to say anything, and you do not have to feel the same way. I just needed to tell you the truth." Olivia's breath caught. She had known, of course, on some level, but hearing him say the words aloud made everything real and immediate and terrifying. "Frank," she whispered, "I am afraid." "I know," he said. "So am I." He stepped back, giving her space, and Olivia felt the loss of his nearness like a physical ache. "I should get to work," Frank said, his voice carefully neutral. "Those fences in the east pasture need attention before the snow comes." He left the barn, and Olivia stood alone, the shawl warm around her shoulders and tears streaming down her face. She was crying for Thomas, for the life they had lost. But she was also crying for herself, for the confusing tangle of emotions in her heart. Because the terrifying truth was that she was falling in love with Frank too. The realization came to her fully formed, undeniable. She loved Frank Sullivan. Not the same way she had loved Thomas, but in a new way, a different way, but no less real. She loved his quiet strength, his patience, his kindness. She loved the way he made her feel safe and valued. She loved the sound of his voice and the warmth in his eyes, and the way he looked at her like she was something precious. And that love did not diminish what she had felt for Thomas. Her heart was big enough to hold both loves, to honor her past while reaching for a future she had thought was lost. Olivia put the milk pail aside and walked out of the barn. Frank was already at work in the pasture, his back to her, but he turned when he heard her approach. "Frank," she called. "Wait." He stopped, watching as she walked toward him across the frosted grass. When she reached him, she took his hands in hers, looking up into his face. "I am afraid," she said again. "I am afraid of what people will say, afraid of dishonoring Thomas's memory, afraid of getting hurt again. But I am more afraid of letting fear stop me from living." She took a shaky breath. "I am falling in love with you too, Frank. I did not want to, I did not plan to, but I am." Frank's face transformed, joy and relief and something tender lighting his eyes. "Olivia," he breathed. "I need time," she said quickly. "I am not ready to marry again, not yet, but I want you in my life. I want to see where this goes. Can you be patient with me?" "I will be patient for as long as you need," Frank promised. He raised her hands to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "We will go as slow as you want. There is no rush." Standing there in the cold October morning, their breath mingling in the frosty air, Olivia felt something she had not felt in months: hope. The future was uncertain and there would be challenges ahead, but she was no longer facing them alone. Over the next weeks, their relationship deepened in small, careful steps. Frank still rode back to town each evening, but now he kissed Olivia goodbye before he left, chaste kisses on her forehead or cheek that nevertheless made her heart race. They held hands when they walked together, sat close on the porch in the evenings, and talked about everything and nothing. Olivia told Frank about her childhood in St. Louis, about her parents who had died of cholera when she was 19, about meeting Thomas at a church social and falling in love with his steadiness, and his dreams of building a life in the West. Frank told her about the wild early days of his cowboying career, about nearly getting trampled in a stampede, about the time he had spent living with a Navajo family who had taken him in when he was injured and alone in the wilderness. "They taught me a lot," Frank said. "About patience, about living in harmony with the land, about what really matters in life. The old man who was the head of the family, he told me once that a man's wealth is not measured in gold or cattle, but in the richness of his relationships." I did not really understand what he meant at the time, but I do now. They were sitting on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the November chill, watching the sun set behind the mountains. Olivia leaned her head on Frank's shoulder and he put his arm around her, holding her close. "I am glad you came to Pino's Altos," she said softly. "I am glad you were at that auction. I do not want to think about what would have happened if you had not been." "I am glad too," Frank said. "Sometimes I think everything in my life, all the wandering and searching, was leading me to that courthouse square to you." Olivia turned to look at him. "Do you really believe that, in fate?" "I believe some things are meant to be," Frank said. "I believe your husband's kindness came back around to bless his wife when she needed it most. I believe that love can be found even in the darkest times." He cupped her face gently. "And I believe I was meant to love you, Olivia Gardner." This time when he kissed her, it was on the lips, a soft, sweet kiss that tasted of coffee and promise. Olivia kissed him back, her hands sliding up to rest on his chest, feeling his heart beating strong and steady beneath her palms. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathing hard. "I love you," Olivia whispered. "I am ready to say it now. I love you, Frank." "I love you too," Frank said and kissed her again. In December, Frank moved his few belongings from the boarding house to the ranch. They maintained the proprieties, with Frank sleeping in the barn and Olivia in the house. But everyone in town knew they were courting seriously. The disapproving whispers continued from some quarters, but more people were supportive, seeing how happy Olivia seemed, how Frank had given her back her land and was helping her build a stable future. On Christmas Eve, Frank asked Olivia to marry him. They were sitting by the fire in the house, the cold wind howling outside while inside was warm and cozy. Frank got down on one knee, holding a simple gold band. "I do not have much to offer you except my love and my promise to spend every day trying to make you happy," he said. "But if you will have me, Olivia, I would be honored to be your husband." Olivia looked at the ring, at Frank's hopeful face, and felt a wave of peace wash over her. This was right. Thomas would approve. She knew it in her bones. "Yes," she said, tears of joy streaming down her face. "Yes, I will marry you." Frank slipped the ring on her finger and stood, gathering her into his arms and spinning her around. They laughed and cried and kissed, celebrating the beginning of their life together. They were married in February of 1879 in the small white church in Pino's Altos. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, attended by the friends Olivia had made in town and the few people Frank knew from his wandering days. Martha Henderson stood up as Olivia's witness, and the local blacksmith, a good man named Peter Crane, stood up for Frank. Olivia wore a new dress of soft gray wool, and Frank wore his best suit, his hair neatly trimmed, his boots polished to a shine. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Frank kissed Olivia with a tenderness that made several of the women in attendance dab at their eyes with handkerchiefs. The wedding celebration was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the barn and food contributed by half the town. There was music and dancing, laughter and good wishes. Ernest Whitmore did not attend, still bitter about losing the auction, but Olivia did not care. She was surrounded by people who loved her, and most importantly, she was beginning a new chapter with a man who cherished her. As the party wound down and the last guests departed, Frank carried Olivia over the threshold of the house they would now share as husband and wife. He set her down gently in the bedroom, where a fire crackled in the small stove and candles cast a warm glow. "Mrs. Sullivan," Frank said, his voice full of wonder. "I like the sound of that." "So do I," Olivia said. She reached up and began unbuttoning his shirt. "I like it very much." They made love slowly, tenderly, learning each other's bodies and hearts. Frank was gentle and patient, making sure Olivia felt safe and cherished. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the bed, talking quietly in the darkness. "Are you happy?" Frank asked, stroking her hair. "Happier than I thought I could be again," Olivia admitted. "I will always love Thomas and I will always miss him, but you have given me a reason to look forward instead of back. You have given me hope. You have given me a home," Frank said. "A real home for the first time in my life. I will spend the rest of my days earning that gift." The years that followed were good ones. Frank proved to be an excellent rancher, using his knowledge from years of cowboying and his mining money to expand the herd and improve the property. He and Olivia worked side by side, building a prosperous operation that became one of the most respected ranches in the area. In the spring of 1880, Olivia discovered she was pregnant. She was nervous, both excited and afraid, but Frank was over the moon with joy. He fussed over her constantly, insisting she rest, bringing her anything she needed, talking to her belly at night as the baby grew. "I hope he has your eyes," Frank would say, his hand on her swollen stomach. "What if it is a girl?" Olivia would tease. "Then I hope she has your beauty and your strength," Frank would reply, kissing her. Their son was born in January of 1881, during a fierce snowstorm that trapped them at the ranch for 3 days. Frank delivered the baby himself, with only his steady hands and Olivia's courage to see them through. When he finally laid the squalling infant on Olivia's chest, they were both crying. "He is perfect," Olivia whispered, examining the tiny fingers and toes. "What should we name him?" "What about Thomas?" Frank suggested gently. "To honor the man who brought us together." Olivia looked up at him with so much love she thought her heart might burst. "Thomas Franklin Sullivan," she said. "It is perfect." Little Thomas was a healthy, happy baby who grew into a curious, energetic toddler. Frank was a devoted father, patient and playful, teaching his son about the ranch and the land from the earliest age. Olivia would often find them together in the barn, Frank explaining the care of the animals to Thomas, who listened with wide, serious eyes, even though he was far too young to understand. 2 years later, a daughter arrived, whom they named Grace after Frank's mother. She had Olivia's dark blonde hair and Frank's pale blue eyes, a beautiful combination. Thomas was initially skeptical of his little sister, but soon became fiercely protective of her. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch prospered, the children grew, and Frank and Olivia's love deepened with each passing year. They had their challenges, of course. There were droughts and hard winters, illnesses and accidents, moments of fear and struggle. But they faced everything together, their partnership growing stronger through adversity. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Frank gave Olivia a gift that made her weep with joy. A new piano, shipped all the way from St. Louis. He had it placed in the parlor, which they had expanded and improved over the years. "I know you sold your piano to try to save the ranch," Frank said. "I have always hated that you had to give up something you loved. Now you can play again." Olivia sat down at the beautiful instrument, running her fingers over the keys. She began to play a song she had loved as a girl, and the music filled the house, rich and warm. Frank sat nearby with Thomas on his lap and Grace in his arms, listening with a smile on his face. This was happiness, Olivia thought. Not the absence of pain or loss, but the ability to find joy again despite it. She had loved and lost, and then loved again. She had been forced to sell her land, but a good man had bought it and given it back to her, and in doing so had given her so much more. A partner, a family, a future. As the children grew older, Olivia told them the story of how she and Frank had met. She told them about their father Thomas, the good man who had died too young, and about the debt of kindness he had left behind that had changed all their lives. She told them about the auction, about despair and hope, about love found in unexpected places. "The most important thing," she would say, "is that you treat people with kindness, the way your first father treated Frank's brother. You never know how a single act of goodness might come back to bless others. Your Papa Frank is here and you exist because Thomas Gardner was a kind man." In 1888, when Thomas was 7 and Grace was 5, Olivia gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named Samuel and Rose. Frank was beside himself with joy, though he was also completely overwhelmed by the chaos of 4 children. "We have our own little cattle drive right here in the house," he joked one evening as children ran in all directions, but Olivia could see the contentment in his eyes. This was what Frank had been searching for during all those years of drifting: a place to belong, a family to love, a purpose bigger than himself. The ranch continued to thrive. They hired a few hands to help with the work, including a young cowboy named Diego who became almost like family. Frank taught Thomas the business of ranching, preparing him to eventually take over, while Olivia taught Grace to manage a household and encouraged both daughters to pursue education and independence. "The world is changing," she told them. "Women have more opportunities now than when I was young. You can be ranchers, teachers, doctors, anything you want. Do not let anyone tell you there are things you cannot do because you are female." On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1889, Frank and Olivia took a rare trip away from the ranch, leaving the children in Diego's capable care. They rode up into the mountains to a secluded meadow Frank had discovered years ago. They spent 3 days there, just the 2 of them, talking and laughing and making love under the stars. "You ever regret it?" Olivia asked one night, lying in Frank's arms by the campfire. "Spending all that money on the ranch, tying yourself down to one place." Frank looked at her like she had asked the most ridiculous question in the world. "Regret it? Olivia, buying that ranch was the best decision I ever made. It brought me you. It gave me a home, a family, a reason to wake up every morning grateful to be alive. I would do it again 1,000 times." "I am so lucky," Olivia said, tears shining in her eyes. "I have been blessed with 2 great loves in my life. Not many people can say that." "I am the lucky one," Frank countered. "I get to love you every day, to see you be an amazing mother, to build a life with you. That is worth more than all the gold in California." They kissed, and the fire crackled, and above them, the stars wheeled through the vast New Mexico sky. As the years went by, the children grew into fine young people. Thomas inherited his father's steady nature and his mother's intelligence, becoming a skilled rancher and a leader in the community. Grace was spirited and independent, eventually becoming a teacher in Pinos Altos and marrying a young lawyer from Santa Fe. The twins, Samuel and Rose, were inseparable, partners in mischief and adventure. Frank and Olivia grew older together, their hair graying, lines deepening around their eyes, but their love never dimming. If anything, it grew richer with time, tempered by years of shared experience and mutual devotion. In 1895, on a warm spring evening, they sat on the porch watching the sunset as they had done thousands of times before. Frank's hand was clasped in Olivia's, and they were content in companionable silence. "You remember the day we met?" Olivia asked suddenly. "Every detail," Frank said. "You were standing under a cottonwood tree, trying so hard to be brave even though your world was falling apart. I took one look at you and something in my heart just knew." "Knew what?" Olivia asked, though she thought she could guess. "That you were going to change my life," Frank said simply. "That I had been wandering all those years just to find my way to you." Olivia squeezed his hand. "Thomas would have liked you. I think he would be glad that you found me, that you took care of me." "I hope so," Frank said. "I have tried to be worthy of the gift his kindness gave me." "You have been more than worthy," Olivia assured him. "You have been everything I needed, everything I could have hoped for. You gave me back my land, but more than that, you gave me back my life. You gave me love when I thought love was finished for me. You gave me children and joy and a future." "How can I ever thank you enough for that?" "You thank me every day," Frank said. "Just by being you, by loving me, by building this life with me. I am the grateful one, Olivia. Always." They kissed as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red and purple. Somewhere in the house, they could hear the laughter of their grandchildren, Thomas's 2 children who were visiting for the week. The sound made them both smile. "We have built something good here," Olivia said. "Something that will last beyond us." "We have," Frank agreed. "This land, this family, this love, it will endure. That is our legacy." As darkness fell and the stars began to appear, they remained on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms. They had weathered storms and drought, loss and fear, but they had emerged stronger, their bond unbreakable. The ranch that had nearly been lost was now a thriving enterprise, home to multiple generations, a testament to what could be built through love and hard work and unwavering partnership. Olivia thought back to that terrible day at the courthouse, when she had been certain her life was over. She could never have imagined then the happiness that lay ahead, the love she would find in a quiet cowboy with kind eyes and a generous heart. Thomas Gardner's single act of kindness had rippled out across time and space, touching lives he would never know, creating a family that carried his name and honored his memory. "I love you," Olivia whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Frank replied. "Today, tomorrow, always." And there, on the porch of the ranch that had been lost and found again, in the heart of the wild New Mexico territory, 2 souls who had found each other against all odds sat together in perfect peace, grateful for every moment of the beautiful life they had built together. Their story was one of loss and redemption, of kindness repaid, of love that healed and restored. It was a story that would be told for generations, a reminder that even in the darkest times, hope could be found, and that sometimes the most extraordinary blessings came from the most unexpected places. The ranch continued to prosper under their care, the land rich and productive, the cattle healthy and numerous. Frank never regretted the $2,000 he had spent at that auction. It was, as he often said, the best investment he ever made. He had bought land and given it back, but in return, he had received something priceless: a home, a family, and the love of a remarkable woman. As the new century approached, Frank and Olivia watched with pride as their children grew into adulthood and started families of their own. Thomas took over the daily running of the ranch, proving himself a capable and innovative manager. Grace's children came to visit every summer, filling the house with laughter and energy. Samuel decided to become a veterinarian, using his love of animals to help ranchers throughout the territory. And Rose, their youngest daughter, surprised everyone by becoming a successful horse breeder, developing a strain of tough, intelligent ranch horses that were sought after throughout New Mexico. Through it all, Frank and Olivia remained the heart of the family, their love story an inspiration to all who knew them. They had proven that second chances were real, that love could bloom even in the hardest soil, and that kindness and generosity always found their way back to those who practiced them. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1899, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a massive celebration. Children and grandchildren filled the house and yard, and friends came from all over the territory to honor the couple who had become pillars of their community. There was music and dancing, an enormous feast, and countless toasts to the happy couple. Frank stood to speak, his arm around Olivia's waist, looking out at the gathered crowd. His hair was silver now, his face weathered by sun and wind, but his pale blue eyes were as clear and kind as ever. 20 years ago, he said, I rode into Pino's Altos not knowing what I would find. I came to pay a debt to a good man who had once saved my brother's life. I never expected to find the love of my life standing in the courthouse square, or to discover a home and a family and a purpose that made every day meaningful. He turned to look at Olivia, his voice thickening with emotion. Olivia, you have made me the happiest man in the world. You have given me everything I never knew I needed. I love you more today than I did on our wedding day, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. Thank you for saying yes, for taking a chance on a wandering cowboy, for building this beautiful life with me. Olivia was crying openly, not caring who saw. Frank, you gave me back my life when I thought it was over. You showed me that love does not die, it just transforms and grows in new directions. You are my heart, my partner, my best friend. I cannot imagine my life without you in it. They kissed to the cheers and applause of their family and friends, and the party continued late into the night. But eventually, as the guests departed, and the children settled down to sleep in various corners of the house and barn, Frank and Olivia found themselves alone on their porch once more. It has been a good life, Olivia said, leaning against Frank's chest as they swayed gently to music only they could hear. The best, Frank agreed. And it is far from over. We have many more years ahead of us, many more sunsets to watch, many more memories to make. He was right. They had many more good years together. Years filled with the daily joys and challenges of ranch life, with the pleasure of watching their grandchildren grow, with the deep satisfaction of a partnership built on mutual respect, trust, and enduring love. When Olivia turned 60 in 1906, their children threw her a surprise party, and Frank presented her with a portrait he had secretly commissioned. It showed her as she had been on their wedding day, beautiful and radiant, hope shining in her eyes. But when Olivia looked at the portrait, she saw more than just her younger self. She saw the journey she had traveled from despair to joy, from loss to fulfillment, from widow to wife and mother. I was so scared that day, she told Frank, studying the portrait. I did not know if I could ever be happy again. You were the bravest person I ever met, Frank said. You had lost everything, but you did not give up. You kept fighting, kept hoping. That courage is what made me fall in love with you. No, Olivia corrected gently. Your kindness is what saved me. Your generosity gave me the chance to be brave. We did this together, Frank. every step of the way. They hung the portrait in the parlor, above the piano Frank had given her years ago. It became a reminder of how far they had come, and how much they had built from the ashes of loss and the seeds of kindness. As they entered their 70s, Frank and Olivia finally began to slow down, letting Thomas and his family take over more of the ranch operations. But they remained active and engaged, always ready with advice or a helping hand, still deeply in love after more than 30 years of marriage. On quiet evenings, they would sit on their porch, wrapped in blankets if the weather was cool, holding hands and watching the sun set over the mountains they loved. They talked about the past and the future, about the grandchildren who were starting to have children of their own, about the changes they had seen in the territory as it moved toward statehood. "You ever think about that day at the auction?" Olivia asked one evening in 1910 as they celebrated their 31st anniversary. "All the time," Frank admitted. "I think about how different my life would be if I had not been there, if I had not acted on that impulse to repay Thomas's kindness. I would be alone, probably still drifting, still searching for something I could never name. Instead, I have you, I have our children and grandchildren, I have this ranch and this life. That $2,000 was the best money I ever spent. And I think about how close I came to losing everything," Olivia said. "I was so certain my life was over, I could not see any way forward, and then you appeared like something out of a dream and changed everything." "We changed everything," Frank corrected. "You had to be willing to take a chance on me, to open your heart again even though it had been broken. That took incredible courage." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the evening sounds of the ranch, cattle lowing in the distance, a dog barking, the wind rustling through the cottonwoods. "No regrets?" Frank asked, as he often did. "Not a single one," Olivia replied, as she always did. "This has been the most beautiful life I could have imagined. Thank you for sharing it with me." "Thank you for letting me," Frank said, and kissed her hand. As the years continued to pass, Frank and Olivia remained devoted to each other and to the family they had built. They lived to see New Mexico achieve statehood in 1912, to see their great-grandchildren born, to see the ranch grow into one of the most successful operations in the state. They grew old together with grace and dignity, their love never wavering, their partnership never failing. They had proven that kindness could change lives, that second chances were real, and that love, true love, could heal even the deepest wounds. On a beautiful spring morning in 1915, Olivia woke in the bed she shared with Frank, the sun streaming through the windows, birds singing outside. She turned to look at her husband, now 73 years old, his face peaceful in sleep. She studied him, memorizing every line and feature, overwhelmed with gratitude for the life they had shared. Frank's eyes opened, and he smiled when he saw her watching him. "Good morning, my love," he said, his voice still rough with sleep. "Good morning," Olivia replied. "I was just thinking about how lucky I am." "We both are," Frank said. He reached out and took her hand, bringing it to his lips. "We have been blessed beyond measure." They rose and went about their morning routine, moving with the ease of long practice. Breakfast together, a walk around the property to check on things, time spent with whichever children or grandchildren were visiting. It was an ordinary day, filled with ordinary joys, and that made it extraordinary. As they sat on the porch that evening, watching yet another spectacular sunset paint the New Mexico sky, Olivia felt a profound sense of peace. She had loved two good men in her life, had raised 4 wonderful children, had seen her family grow and prosper. She had nearly lost everything, and instead she had gained more than she ever dreamed possible. "Frank," she said softly, "thank you." "For what?" he asked, though his eyes told her he knew. "For everything," Olivia said simply. "For seeing me when I felt invisible, for caring when I felt forgotten, for loving me when I thought I would never be loved again, for giving me back my land and for giving me back my life. For every day of these 36 years, for being you." Frank pulled her close and she rested her head on his shoulder right where it belonged. "It has been my honor and my joy," he said, "every single day." They sat together as the stars began to emerge. Two souls who had found each other through tragedy and kindness, who had built a legacy of love that would endure for generations. The ranch that had nearly been lost was now a thriving enterprise, home to a large and loving family, all because a cowboy had chosen kindness over profit, generosity over greed. This was their story, a tale of loss and redemption, of second chances and enduring love, of the incredible power of a single act of kindness to change lives in ways that echoed through time. It was a story that would be told and retold in the Sullivan family for generations to come. A reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope could be found, and that love, when given freely and received gratefully, could transform everything. Frank and Olivia Sullivan lived out the rest of their days on the ranch they both loved, surrounded by family, secure in their devotion to each other, grateful for every moment of the beautiful, extraordinary life they had built together. They had proven that happy endings were possible, that love could bloom in the most unexpected places, and that the greatest treasures in life were not land or money, but the connections we forge with other hearts. Their love story, born in a courthouse square on a hot September day in 1878, endured as a testament to the best of human nature. The capacity for kindness, the courage to love again, and the grace to accept the gifts that life and generous hearts so freely offer.